How's it going? My name is Keith Seymour, and this is our first episode of Beyond the Youth Room podcast. And I wanted to introduce ourselves. My name is Keith, and this is
Ryan Cottle.
and we are youth pastors in Northern Virginia, and we are wanted to just help other youth leaders. If we can share anything that's benefited our ministries here in Northern Virginia, we want to share that with anybody else that might be willing to help. We help lead a youth leaders network in our area, which is comprised of other youth pastors and youth leaders that are living out what we call gospel advancing ministry. And so today we're going to be covering the important aspect that we've benefited in our ministries from is setting a bold vision. And we're going to get into a little bit of the details there, but basically just going beyond the status quo of youth ministry, not just counting attendance as a metrics of success, but really focusing on and casting a vision that ignites growth in your youth ministry, spiritually and numerically, when it comes to seeing students revolutionized by the gospel. So before we get into our content today, wanted to mention that our podcast is sponsored by Edge Clubs, and we have a free downloadable training manual if you want to take the guesswork out of reaching more students in your area for the gospel using public school campus ministry. So Edge Club has a mission to connect students to Jesus and back to the local church, and they do that through training students to be missionaries to their schools. And so if you're interested in more, you can check out edgeclub.org. So before we get into our content, I wanted to share a little bit about my background, and then Ryan can explain a little bit about his background. So I felt called into youth ministry at an early age, even as a teenager. When I became a Christian as a teenager, I didn't think that you could actually get paid to be a youth leader or a youth pastor. And when someone mentioned that, I was like baffled. I was like, "You mean I could do this? Like what I've been doing? I was leading my friends to Christ. I was discipling people." They're like, "Yeah, you should consider youth ministry." And I was like, "What do you mean? Like you can do that like as a career or like like you get paid for it?" And it seemed like a crazy idea. So I pursued a youth ministry degree and have been serving in youth ministry ever since. And have been blessed to see just generations of students that have gone through the ministry, and some of them even have kids now, gotten married and have kids, and just to see that play out has been a true blessing of mine. Most recent years, I've been focusing on equipping and training other youth leaders, specifically within our youth leaders network here in Northern Virginia. And we have a pretty vibrant and helpful youth ministry network here that really shares best practices and lives out the gospel advancing ministry values. So I am married to my high school sweetheart, Caroline, and we have four boys. And we live here in the Northern Virginia area where we're born and raised. So, Brian, tell us a little about yourself.
So my name is Ryan Cottle, and my story is very different than Keith's. While I was very blessed to have an awesome youth group growing up and very strong Christian parents, and I was even walking very strongly in my faith, my desire was not for ministry. That was not what I anticipated, and so I actually went to school, had the privilege to play baseball in college, and so my main concern was just playing baseball and life after baseball. My thought was something in business, and so I actually graduated with my MBA. But when I did, God had other ideas, and He made it very clear that His calling for me was student ministry. And so my fiance at the time, my now wife Kathleen, we kind of decided, okay, I think this is what God is calling us to. And so we got married, and I came on staff as student ministry director all in the same summer. And now we have been married for 4 years, and I've been in student ministry for 4 years. God has blessed us with a 1-year-old son, and just so thankful that God has taken me into student ministry because one of the best things I ever heard of advice when I was thinking about as God called me into student ministry is if you can do anything else besides student ministry, do it. Not because student ministry isn't great, but just because you have to know that you're called to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that has absolutely been a fact. God has continued to reaffirm that. So just been so thankful to work with other youth pastors in our local area and just continue to work with them just to reach our community and our students for Christ. So
Yeah. Yeah, and so one of the things that really helped me in my ministry was kind of hitting a rock bottom level in ministry where I felt like I had been working towards something for so long and I didn't feel like I was experiencing the impact that I know the Lord could bring in our area, in our youth ministry. And that started kind of an exploratory process for me to really figure out, okay, like what are other people doing in youth ministry? Like, is just day in and day out like counting numbers attendance wise, like is that like the be all end all with how many people are showing up to a room, like and And it wasn't until it was around 2016 or so. Oh no, before that, around 2015, I really started to look into Dare to Share's Gospel Advancement Ministry values. So they were about to come out with the book Gospelize, and they did a huge, extensive research project that I was at the time in seminary, and I was writing my master's thesis on basically that problem of like, why aren't we seeing the results that we know the Lord can do in this generation? And I really believe that it was a leadership problem, like on my part. Like I really knew that the Lord could work, and I knew that I didn't have the excuses that other youth leaders had, where I was trained, I had a youth ministry degree, I went to seminary, like I had a large youth ministry budget, I was full-time staff, but yet I didn't see what I know the Lord could do in our ministry. And so that exploratory process really led me to set a bold vision for our youth ministry, to really hone in on setting a goal, and we want to of course discuss that and our experience that we've had with setting a goal or bold vision. But really crafting a bold vision was one of the first steps in really seeing a different type of youth ministry that I didn't know was possible. I thought that it could happen, but I didn't know that it could come to reality until we started to live on purpose and to be missional towards a large, bold goal. So I wanted to start off and just share one of my favorite quotes. So I'm huge into missionary biographies. William Carey is one of my favorite missionaries. I even named all four of my sons after Christian historical figures. Not William Carey though. Hudson Taylor, Billy Graham, Dawson Trotman, and C.S. Lewis. So Clive is my fourth. And so, anyways, this quote from William Carey: "Expect great things from God and attempt great things for God." And so we just wanted to do that. We want to expect and pray towards amazing things that God can do, and we wanted to attempt great things for God. We wanted to live out and just go big, to swing for the fences, so to speak. And I love this quote from John Haggai. He said, "Attempt something so great for God that it's doomed to failure unless God be in it." And we wanted to look back as a youth ministry and say, the only reason why this was possible is because God did it. Like it had to be unexplainable any other way. Like we couldn't just fabricate something up ourselves. And we even see in Scripture that the Apostle Paul had a bold vision to bring the gospel to the Gentiles. I mean, talking about a huge task where he's like, I want the gospel to be known to everywhere where it's not known yet. And he even said that in Romans 15, where he says, "It's always been my ambition to preach the gospel where Christ was not known, so that I would not be building on someone else's foundation." And we have a huge amount of students in our area, but total, there's a huge harvest in our nation of teenagers that most likely won't be engaged with the gospel unless we take action. And so, yeah, so tell us a little bit about your experience with the Bold Vision. I shared a little bit about just my exploratory process, but share a little bit of that, and then I have a very specific story that I wanted to share when it comes to how we as a ministry transformed or transitioned to focusing on a larger goal to bring purpose in our ministry. So share about your experience, Ryan.
Yeah, so a little bit similar in the fact that when I first came on, in student ministry, my thought was just, well, let's have a good time and let's teach these students about Christ and help them to learn more about Jesus. And we were seeing spiritual fruit, but there was a little bit of, okay, how do we, when we read the book of Acts, we don't just see them gathering, we see the church being a catalyst and being sent out. And so how do you make that change in student ministry? And so we sat down with our adult leaders and kind of talked over what would it look like to really say, you know what, we want this youth ministry to go beyond the walls of this church. And we had been in the community, we'd been doing different things, but we really wanted to turn it over to our students. And so we came up with some bold vision for that year. And one of the things that we explained to our students is that this was something we were going to accomplish together. And this was something we felt God calling us to. And so for that year, for that school year, we set a vision and a goal to share the gospel with 500 people. And we were praying for 50 of those people to make a first-time decision for Christ. And so as the school year was winding down, it was really, really cool because we've been praying for it. And while we didn't hit our goal, we still saw 47 people trust Christ as their Savior. And that not only included our students, but it also included some of our students' parents and some of our students' siblings, because
Yeah.
it went beyond just the student ministry and the youth environment. It went more to the local church. And so when you make that shift, it can be a little bit painful because, there's some roadblocks there as well to kind of figure out. But ultimately, it has just done wonders for our student ministry. And I can clearly say that now feel like God has gotten involved in a mighty way, and God is ultimately the one leading the student ministry, not me. So yeah.
That's huge. Yeah, when we we as youth ministry, we wanted to make that shift. This was back in 2015, 2016, and one of those ways that we wanted to really immerse our students in kind of this gospel advancing ministry focus was to take them to Lead the Cause, which was a program that Dare to Share puts on. It's kind of a mission between a mission trip and a camp, and we took students out to Denver, Colorado. I think there's about five or six of our student leaders, and it was me and my female coordinator staff. We all went out there and just like immersed ourselves in this kind of gospel advancing ministry aspect. And one of the breakout sessions that they had for the youth leaders was to develop a bold vision, how to craft a bold vision, how to write it down, how to set a goal based on your cause turf, which is basically your mission field. And and so as we were doing this, I was with my other staff member, and we were talking back and forth, and we were like, what would it look like, for us to like, aim high for this ministry, like to set a bold goal for our youth ministry. And so I remember I was like, well, you tell me your number that you're thinking of first, like as far as how many students we could realistically see come to know Jesus as a result of sharing the gospel more. And she had said, I think like 25 students would be like amazing, which, it would be like, I mean, even one would be amazing.
Yeah,
But,
absolutely.
to really see, kind of us like dream big, it's like 25. And I had already had kind of a number picked out, and I was thinking like 50. And I kind of felt proud of myself. Like it was double what,
You expected
what she
more.
was. Yeah. So I was like, okay, like I have more faith than her, to trust the Lord for big things. And so since our numbers were so far off, like as far as like, what we could put on paper, like to pray towards this whole upcoming year, we were like, well, why don't we ask the student leaders that were here? We have a session where we're just going to spend time with them, and they've been experiencing a lot of what the Lord was doing in other ministries. They'd, seen what was happening as other people were sharing. And so we, we asked our student leaders, we got them together and we said, okay, what would it look like for us to dream big as a youth ministry? And, how many students do we think that, we can see come to Christ this upcoming year? And I'll never forget, there was one quiet student leader that we had named Lydia, who just looked us, square in the eye, almost like tears in her eyes, like getting choked up. She's like, I think we should trust the Lord for 200. And and then we kind of like looked at each other, like my staff member and I were like, oh yeah, yeah, definitely, let's go with that. And so we like, it was funny because afterwards she was like, well, what were you guys thinking? Like, you guys said that you had, and we're like, oh, that's not important. Like we're just, we really wanted to go with what you guys said. And so yeah, so what that taught us though was we have students that are ready for a challenge. We have students that are wanting to be challenged. And my big thing, and I've talked to you about this a lot, about how there's often excuses of other things that compete with youth group or youth ministry, like sports and band and extracurricular activities. And my big thing is, I believe that they challenge the students and they engage students more than we do as churches, and so therefore they win. So they like they want to do hard things. We've seen this generation; they're very cause driven, so they want to get behind a cause that they believe in, and we want them to get behind the cause of Christ. And I think it's our role as youth leaders to really channel that energy and that focus into a larger goal. So, what does a bold vision look like? Let me just go through some definitions. So a bold vision is a longer range vision statement that drives all of your ministry efforts towards one big, hairy, audacious goal, or in the Christian world, a BHAG goal, big, hairy, audacious goal might be a big, holy, audacious goal, just to kind of Christianize it. And if it makes you super nervous, you're probably right on the right track. It's a vision that gets you up in the morning. It's a vision that helps you to keep going when things are tough. And it it sounds maybe grandiose or theoretical, but we've seen that we see this in Scripture, as I mentioned with Apostle Paul. We see this in historical missions, where they're like, hey, we want to take the gospel to this whole area that has never heard the gospel before. And so what is the difference between a traditional vision statement and a bold vision? So do you want to talk about that, Ryan?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, coming from a background that is kind of being trained to go into the corporate world, a vision statement and a mission statement often looks really good on a website, and that's kind of what it's designed to do. Is kind of to sit on a website. It might be something that you share every once in a while, and it's while you put thought into it, and it's a good thing. A bold vision is very different. A bold vision is something where you're inviting students in to be a part of, and it is now driving your ministry. And like you said, it is the single focus of your ministry. It doesn't mean that you don't do other duties as assigned, and as youth pastors we have a lot of those, but it's something that is almost in some sense, like you said, challenging. It is something that can sometimes feel daunting, but ultimately it's something that should drive us closer to God. And so I think the biggest difference is that a bold vision is measurable. When we have a vision or a mission statement, if our vision statement was simply, to share the love of Jesus, well, that's really broad, and while really good, a lot of things can fit under that. But if we set a vision of we want to share the gospel with 500 individuals, well, now at the end of the year, it's like, either we did it or we not. And the cool part is that we explain to students is, look, if we don't hit 500, it's not a failure, because guess what? We're sharing the gospel way more than we would be if we weren't putting this in our vision.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think that's the biggest difference, is that a vision statement, a bold vision, is measurable, and it's something that is singular focused that you're inviting your students into to participate in.
Yeah. Absolutely, and a bold vision, it's actually an acronym as well. So the B in bold stands for beyond your personal capacity to achieve. So you want to have something that's beyond your personal capacity to achieve, where it's like, okay, I know I can realistically have a gospel conversation at least once a week. Like that's my pace of life. I think I can accomplish that on my own. So if we have 52 weeks, our goal is youth ministry to do 52 gospel conversations this year.
We did it.
Yeah, one person realistically could achieve that, and so we want to think about beyond your personal capacity to achieve, and that it involves students, right? That we want to get them engaged, not just something that their youth pastor or youth leader is doing on their own. The O in bold is outcome, not activity driven. So oftentimes, we want to input. The inputs are activity, the outputs are the outcomes, and so sometimes we want to increase our activity. So in other words, if we want to see more more crops harvested, we plant more crops. And so in the same way, if we haven't seen people coming to know Jesus, the harvest is still there. Like the harvest is still plentiful, the workers are few. And if I'm reading that right in Matthew 9, that tells us that there are more people that are willing to hear the gospel and respond than there are people to tell them.
Yeah.
And so there's not a shortage of mission field.
No.
But I think there's a shortage of activity that leads to output. So if you're not seeing students come to Christ, I fear that it might be because you're not sharing the gospel enough with enough students. Because we found, as you know, students are willing to engage in gospel conversations. They're willing to talk about their faith. In fact, we've been experimenting with some things in our programming where we're doing more dialogue about faith, and it's really going well, where people are bringing questions and we're talking through different hard faith questions in a dialogue setting, not a didactic teaching aspect. So it's outcome, not activity driven. And then L is it leverages your group to lead the way. Again, we can't just focus on things that we can do ourselves as youth leaders or adults. We want to leverage our group to lead the way. So if we know that we can only fit so many people in our youth room, but there's so many people that your students can touch their lives outside of the youth room, that's why we're really focusing on this podcast, even being beyond the youth room. Like we cannot see a massive change in a culture by the grace of God if we're not engaging outside of the churches. We have to take the gospel to people, to where the gospel's on the lips of students that are in their cafeterias and in their gyms and sports teams and workplaces. And so all those are leveraging your group to lead the way. And then the D in bold is it's driven by addition and multiplication. So historically, youth ministry has been very driven by addition, where it's like, okay, bring your friends to youth group so that your youth pastor can share the gospel, or an adult leader or pastor can share the gospel with them, and then we add students to our youth ministry. To do that effectively, though, for a massive scale, we have to focus on multiplication, and that's why we went from 11 really disciples in the book of Acts to where it exploded in growth because they were focused on a multiplication strategy. So it has to be driven by addition and multiplication at the same time. So we want to mobilize your group to personally make disciples who also make disciples themselves. So let's talk a little bit about some obstacles. So when you start to shake things up and you set a bold vision or a goal, because we feel called to really go go big for the Lord. What are some challenges and resistance and obstacles that we've had to navigate before? So I'll let you share a little bit, Ryan.
Yeah. Well, just like Jesus in his ministry, when he was healing people and performing miracles and giving out free food, everybody loved Jesus. It was when he challenged them to do something that a lot of his disciples, as Scripture tells us, fell away. And that can be said too for youth ministry. Now, thankfully, when we made that shift, the kids were in. The kids were all in. Some of their parents were a little confused about what we were doing, and the reason being is, I got feedback from parents saying things like, my kid's not ready to share their faith, or my kid feels pressured to share their faith, and isn't this a little bit legalistic, because we were tracking things, and there's a lot of different things that I could have said or responded to, but ultimately it just simply was like, hey, when I look at Scripture, this is what the early church did. This is what Jesus called them to do. Yeah. It says in Acts that, and the disciples took the gospel to all of Jerusalem, and then to the entire region, and then to the ends of the known world at that time. So how did they know that? Well, they had a vision and they were working towards it. And so there's kind of a expectation, I think, from a lot of people where, well, youth ministry is just kind of like, you entertain my kids, maybe give them a little bit of Jesus every now and then. Hopefully it helps them, with their morals. And that's not every parent. In fact, I would even say that's not most parents, thankfully. Yeah. But there is a little bit of pushback when you start to go from what I like to call a feeding ground, where you're simply just feeding them, to a training ground where you're sending them out. And so, as with anything, whenever we attempt something bold for Christ, there is an opposition to that. Yep. And that's not always the devil. Sometimes the opposition is complacency and just continuing to do things the way that we've always done them.
Yeah. I found that it's the difference between a cruise ship and a battleship. Yeah. So the mentality on a cruise ship is a lot different than a battleship, right? So a cruise ship, they're just there to entertain themselves and and eat a ton of food, put on a whole bunch of weight by eating lobster and steak every meal. And
you guys have lobster and steak at your youth?
That's not in the youth budget. Trust me. But we have we have kind of conditioned ourselves to really focus on making things comfortable, and maybe not intentionally, but I think that's where we've been as a youth ministry and as a church in America. And really, when we shake things up, where we're like, no, we gather to equip you so that you can scatter. And I think that was a huge paradigm shift for us that led to a lot of obstacles. And I have a pastor at our church that I've served alongside of for a long time, who used to be a Navy SEAL. And one thing that I asked him when he first joined our staff, I was like, what are the parallels of being a Navy SEAL and being a pastor now? And he's like, well, if you're being shot at, you're on the battlefield. It's like, oh yeah, so he's like, if you are experiencing obstacles and opposition, oftentimes that means that you're on the battlefield, like you're making a difference. Now, if you're not experiencing that, I would definitely be questioning like, okay, am I really making a difference here, or is this just going through the motions? And so, so some of the things that we experienced was criticism for measuring stuff, criticism for encouraging students to keep track of gospel conversations. And we weren't legalistic in the battle, in the sense that, like, you're not a Christian if you don't share the gospel. Like, I think that's where legalism comes from, is like where you're tying your identity in Christ to what your performance is. And of course, we would never say that, and we got to be careful, like, obviously not to overemphasize, certain actions or performance. And of course, but it was a thing where we're just like, hey, we just want to keep track of these things. The Lord knows the hearts of the students that are, saying that they gave life to Christ. We'll see over time if it was a fruitful, seed that was planted and is growing. But ultimately, we know that the Lord is still the one that saves, the one, that opens our mouths to be able to share the gospel. And so with all that, it's definitely challenging. But another thing that happened, when we start to be outreach focused and sharing the gospel, is we have non-Christians or non-Christian background students. They might have become Christians, they now start attending, and then we have kind of a messy situation, where they're bringing their old junk, as far as like their old habits, their old life that they haven't, quite changed yet, as a new creation in Christ, to youth group, and that like definitely messes with the Christian kids, and their perspective of, even the parents are like, okay, I'm sending my kids to youth group. And as a parent of a middle schooler myself now, I get that. Like, I understand, like, okay, we want to protect our students from outside influence that might hinder them. But it does get messy when you see students that, from a non-Christian background, come up. And I've shared this story with Ryan and some of our other youth leaders in our area, but we had a student that came to Christ early on, when I was a youth pastor down in South Carolina, where I went to school, and I remember we asked him to give a testimony from the church, where he was really not churched at all, and then his friend had invited him. He came to Christ, and he was just super excited. He was growing in his faith, and we're like, well, let's put him in front of people and just share this amazing story about how God transformed his life. And he gets up there, and I was like, tell us a little about what the Lord's doing. He's like, man, I just effing love Jesus. Except he didn't use the abbreviation. And it was there was definitely some side eyes towards the youth leader at that point. And so I got some flack for that. But it was like, I mean, he's learning. Like, he like, and it's almost like he didn't know. And then he like realized, he's like, I shouldn't have said that, right? Like, and but his just overflow of excitement came out in that moment, and it can lead to some messy moments in youth ministry. So let's talk a little bit about turning a vision into action. So how do we keep translating that vision that we set for our youth ministry? How far out should the vision be? Should it be only like for a school year? Should it be a 5-year plan? What does that look like? What are your recommendations, Ryan, as you've kind of been living this out? And then how do we keep that vision in the forefront of people's minds and continue to stay focused on it? Because it's one thing to like write something down on a piece of paper, even like create a banner you can put up on the youth room. But how do we actually keep that at the forefront, where we're tracking metrics and we're moving towards that bold vision continuously?
So I think, as far as how far out it should be, I think a little bit depends on your ministry as well. I mean, we live in Northern Virginia, where it's such a transient area, so where people are moving in and out all the time. And that's something that we struggle with for coming up with curriculum or things like that, is, we constantly, there's so much turnover just because of the area we're in. So it might look different if you're in a small town where, everybody kind of knows everybody and everybody's been there, or if you're in an area like us. But I think ultimately, when it comes to students, their life is kind of dictated by a school year. And whether or not they're in public school or private school or homeschool, the way their life kind of revolves around is the school year. And so it certainly is great to have maybe goals that are a little bit more long range, but I found the best to be a school year, because it almost is like a reset every time. When kids go back into school, it's kind of like their New Year's of like, this year I want to do this, I want to do this. And so if we can play a part in that and helping them do that, I think it's really been beneficial to them, just going by a school year by school year, and lumping the summer in, of course, obviously. So I think you want it to be far enough out to where, because you're never going to grow straight. It's never going to be linear. One of my favorite things I like to do is to explain to people is that if you ever take the stock market and you look at like one day, you're like, okay. And then if you go a week, and then if you keep zooming out far enough, you're going to see it's not linear, but it is growing. And so long range enough.
Is this investment advice?
No. Do I have to like disclaimer? But that's
we're not financial advisors.
Yes. We'll put that in the tagline. But I think that's kind of, a school year is really great. Now, again, if you want to do multiple years out, your students, and if you can keep them motivated enough and keep that in the forefront. But we found that there's definitely peaks and valleys in that passion and motivation. And one of the great ways to help keep students motivated is, we've kind of all done it, right? Where we say like, I'm going to do this, and then a week goes by, and maybe you're still kind of doing it, but then 2 weeks go by. And so the easiest way to kill vision is for it not to be at the forefront of your ministry. And so every time we meet as a student ministry, twice a week, our goals are mentioned with everybody. Our leaders are, sharing it in our small groups. And we're also using visual aids such as banners, and ways to track that too. We, something kind of an idea that we, I think, stole.
Resource.
Yes,
Resource.
that's a good Christian word for it. But it was stolen for gospel reasons, and it was But we had a cross made, and we got ping pong balls, white ping pong balls and orange ping pong balls, and we told the students, every time we share the gospel with a non-believer, we ask that you drop a white ping pong ball in, and it's not like a part of our programming where we go, okay, time out, now stand up if you. No, it's just in the back, and it's anonymous as they walk in, and the orange ping pong balls represent the students who have shared their faith, and somebody has accepted Christ because of their prayers, because of their sharing the gospel with them. And so that is the first thing our students see every time they walk in. And so every time a student walks in, whether it's their 100th time at youth group or their first time at youth group, they're going to see a visual representation of the eternal impact that God is using us to have. And our vision is going to be explained from the stage, and all of our programming revolves around that, and with the whole singular focus of mind of everything we do is to achieve this goal. And so I think that's one of the easiest ways to do it, because kids, like you said, they want to work towards something. They have so much energy and so much optimism. I think the most important role we as adults play is just simply channeling it and just saying, hey, you're kind of, maybe you're all over the place. Let's go here. And all it takes is them to share the gospel once and somebody to trust Christ. And they're like, I get this. This is awesome.
Wins.
This is so cool.
They see some wins. And it's important too, like we found that like even sharing the good, bad, and the ugly with like, so in other words, if they're in the trenches and it's not going well, have them, so it's like sometimes we to the detriment of our students only have people share testimonies of when something amazing happened. And yet when we keep that at the forefront of like, hey, this is hard, this is what hard feels like. and so we had this person, they relationally risked their relational equity with a friend by sharing the gospel, and they got completely shut down. They're going to share about it right now. And so just to share like the good, the bad, and the ugly, just so that students have a realistic expectation of, okay, we're going in the trenches. Like, Data Share even has this thing that they used to share in their conferences. It's like, awkward is awesome. So just embrace the awkwardness of like a weird conversation. We do, even with the gospel conversations, we do role playing where they go back and forth, like just to even keep that at the forefront of the mind. But even when you have a bold vision, I know one of the benefits of having that is that it helps you decide what to do and what not to do when it comes to programming. So we all know that, the experience of, a parent that graciously offers their home for a certain type of event. It's like, oh, well, I have a fire pit, so why don't we all have all the youth over? We'll do hot dogs. Is roasting hot dogs a bad thing? No. But you can honestly level it through, like filter it through your bold vision to say, does this help us accomplish the bold vision? Okay, or how can this help us accomplish the bold vision? So it's not just purposeless programs and events that don't really help us to move the needle when it comes to. It's like, okay, will students feel more comfortable about attending a hot dog roasting fire, bonfire, whatever, than stepping foot in church? Okay, well, let's use this as an outreach event, not just a social event, but how can we leverage this for advancing the gospel and accomplishing our bold vision? Another thing, as you were talking, that came to mind was really focusing on, tracking the metrics continuously by keeping that visual thing, like you said with the ping pong balls, or even we've done this in the past where we had a prayer care share section like up on the wall of our youth room. And we had students that would take, like a thumbtack and a sticky note, which, by the way, sticky notes don't stay on there long term.
No.
They're just made for temporary use. So we tried that before, and they all fell off. And we're like, well, we don't know which section they go in now. Like, what do we? So we use thumbtacks and a cork board, and then we have them move the the name that they're praying for, and if they've demonstrated that they've cared for them in a tangible way, like they serve their friend in some way. And then they, shared with them. So prayer, care, share. And that's kind of the logical, like, step-by-step process that they can go through what they call the call circle, just going through prayer, care, share with their friends. And realistically, that's a metric that you can track too. Is like, we had this many students, pray for the lost this many times, or this many people have been prayed over, or this many people have had the share, had the gospel shared with them this year. So with that, we have some conclusions and takeaways. So if you can just summarize what we've talked about here today. One is that a bold vision is super crucial for you to have purpose and a kind of a fire, a fuel to ignite your youth ministry towards a common goal. Remember, that's different than just a mission statement. It's different than just a generic vision statement. And we talked about this before, but it should be kind of under the umbrella of your church's mission statement. It shouldn't like contradict, something that your church is doing or anything like that, but to really focus on having that under the authority and umbrella of your church. But at the same time, it doesn't have to. It's not supposed to be generic. So a bold vision is something that's very specific and measurable. Something that could be a year goal, or it could be a 5-year goal, but then keeping track of that, in those years. So in other words, if you have a 5-year goal to see 5,000 students hear the gospel from a friend, okay, we'll reverse engineer that. So I mean that's 5,000, so 1,000 a year to hit that. So our yearly goal or annual goal is 1,000, and then you can track that even by quarters. To 250 a quarter, and then going from there. So you can track a bold vision that way, but to keep it forefront of your students' minds, so that you can do that. And one thing that I even learned recently that was pretty fascinating. So one of the most effective things that leads to weight loss is weighing yourself every day. One of the most effective things in increasing your income is checking your bank accounts every day. Bank balance every day. So like even just like checking in, have a metrics dashboard where you're keeping track of something, that you're looking at it regular, because you don't want to set a goal and then reevaluate it at the end of the school year and be like, I guess we didn't hit it. Yeah. Like, you want to be tracking along the way, and that'll help you to keep it at the forefront of your mind and on your students' minds. Anything that you would add just to recap some key takeaways?
Yeah, I think one of the other key takeaways is understanding that whatever that vision is going to drive all of your programming and all of your efforts. And so when you sit down to craft that bold vision, it needs to be done in prayer and asking God, okay, God, what is your vision for this ministry? Because it's not our ministry, it's God's ministry. And so, we can very easily go, well, I think it should be this, or I think it should be this, but we need to incorporate God in that, because he's the one, we plant seeds, he's the one who gives the increase. Yeah. And so making sure that we are including God in that and letting it be his vision for our student ministry. Yep. And the last thing I would like to say, just for our viewers and our listeners, is just simply this. When you have a bold vision, it is absolutely just encouraging to see and know that it is your calling. There's been many times in student ministry where I've kind of questioned, like, are we doing the right thing? Is this really working? Is this really pleasing to God? But when we have that vision that we can fall back on, that has measurables behind it, I can go and look at that cross filled with kids who've shared their faith and orange ping pong balls representing people who have accepted Christ, and I can go, yeah, you know what? It doesn't matter how hard it gets. Like, that's worth it, because that's what God is calling us to, and this is what real ministry is all about. And so that's honestly my biggest takeaway, is like, this sustains people in youth ministry. And obviously we work in a line of work where there's so much turnover. The average youth pastor is 18 months, I think, at this point. And so that bold vision just sustains you as well, to understand that this is the ministry that God is allowing you to be a part of, is having an impact. Yeah, and I was going to say, like, I mean, what better way to kind of, so to speak, burn the ships of like all-in commitment to a place where you're questioning, like, if you should just bail out sooner than you should. Yeah. Because you're like, no, I want to see this through. I want to see, this bold vision, that I set for, 3, 4, or 5 years out. And it really helps us to stay on task, and not to really, so sometimes like pre-deciding, I'm going to be here for the next 5 years. That actually helps you to stick around like longer. And kids see that.
Yeah, exactly. And so when they see that you're serious about the long-term impact that your youth ministry can bring, it definitely adds to the commitment level that you have to be all in, to draw a line in the sand and say, hey, I'm committed to this. And I think it'll definitely help. But yeah, we want to thank you guys so much for tuning into this first episode of Beyond the Youth Room podcast. Again, I am Keith, and this is Ryne, and we have a gift for you at edgeclub.org. If you wanted to check out the free downloadable training manual, you can head over there and download that if you wanted to implement that as a campus strategy for your youth ministry. We want to invite you, if you're seeing this on YouTube, to subscribe and to like this, so that it gets seen by more people. If you're listening to this audibly on a podcast format, make sure that you subscribe is there as well. So thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you guys next time.